And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest, this will be fun, is Howard Brown. Howard is the founder and CEO of Ring DNA, where he fosters an innovative, fast-growing, and collaborative culture. He's a three-time entrepreneur and former clinical psychologist. So that's an interesting combination right there. Howard's thought leadership on sales, entrepreneurship, AI has appeared on Bloomberg TV, Fox Business, Forbes, and Entrepreneur Magazine. He's a frequent speaker at conferences such as Dreamforce and AWS reInvent. And he's been listed as one of the most 100 intriguing entrepreneurs of 2019 by Goldman Sachs and the top CEO according to Comparably. So without further ado, welcome aboard, Howard.
Peter, it's so great to be here with you.
My pleasure. So I want to dive in because, in the Venn diagram of my world and your world, it's thought leadership, right? So tell me a bit about, first, how are you defining it? And then what are you doing with it?
So look, I think we're all hungry for thought leadership. I think as consumers, as people who have, quite frankly, in more recent times, have felt somewhat isolated, right? We don't have the same level of human interaction as we used to have. We don't have the same level of social connection. And we've moved towards more and more digital. And because of that, I think people are looking for things that matter to them, things that help them, and things that ultimately drive excitement, intrigue, and vision. And so for us, thought leadership is really a core piece of what humans crave. They crave direction, they crave inspiration, they crave like-minded people. I think that tapping into people's wants and needs and providing a level of connection is really core to everything we do. As you mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist by background. I spent a lot of time really focusing on how people connect, what causes strain in that connection, how people tell the narrative of their own lives, and where the breakdowns are.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that speaks to sort of this innate human need to connect and be intrigued and the curiosity and all that sort of stuff, which I get, and I agree with you. Flip it to the other side and talk a bit as, Howard, the CEO. So you just had your sort of human therapy hat on. Not that CEOs are not human, but now put the CEO hat on top of that one and say, well, so what, right? Like, what's the benefit of thought leadership for a CEO in a space that's crowded, standing out from the competition, being able to show prospects and clients who you guys are and what you're about? How has that been part of the story for you?
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't believe that the two pieces are detached. I think actually, if we're working towards helping people, employees, companies optimize performance, if we're trying to provide a better customer experience, which ultimately leads to a better brand experience, that it requires us to think about our employees. That requires us to think about the experience that we're giving our employees. And if they have tools and processes that don't help them excel and help them grow, then it's going to be really difficult for them to connect with a customer, right? So everybody's talking about
so stay there for a minute, because most often when we're talking about thought leadership from a business perspective, right, we tend to think more about external. This would be great for prospects. This would be great for clients. This would be great for whatever. You just went down a slightly different path, which I find really interesting, is it shows internally. So the value of thought leadership internally helps us align to the mission, the vision, what are we doing? Why are we different? Whatever. So you're getting that internal buy-in. And therefore, I would imagine that's going to emanate, radiate, whatever, when your employees are touching prospects, clients, and such.
That's right. And that's what we do as a company, as a culture. And that's what our product does. Our product really is about focusing people on those areas that they can optimize to deliver the best performance, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not trying to automate people out of the equation. What we're trying to do is figure out what they're good at, where there's opportunities for growth, challenge them, and help them get better. And I think once you, as an employee, feel like you're supported, feel like the tools that you're given make you smarter, make you more
Mm-hmm.
contextual, help you exceed and excel at your job, all of that equates into delivering better experiences for your customers, which ultimately lead to better enterprise value for your company.
So speak now to other CEOs that are out there listening that have a good business. It's growing, it's vibrant, there's no obvious fires or anything along those lines, but they haven't done the thought leadership thing yet, whatever that might mean. What should they be thinking? Where might they start? What should they avoid? Right. So give them sort of from a CEO to CEO, hey, here's, thought leadership 101. Here's what to think about and what to consider and how to maybe go about integrating thought leadership into your business.
Well, look, Peter, I'm a huge fan. I'm now 39 podcasts in over the last month and a half. So I would start by listening to this podcast, really. I think it's really important to understand what thought leadership is and what it isn't. And it varies, right? It definitely varies from CEO to CEO, company to company. What I believe is at the end of the day, a lot of the services and products that we are providing, quite frankly, are getting commoditized.
And I mean, actually, not a lot. I would say, if we're honest, everything is at risk of being commoditized.
That's right. That's right.
Right. And I think that I just want to stay there because I think it's a key point in that there are certain things that are obviously businesses that are more at risk of being commoditized. But when you come at it from a technology standpoint, oh, we have our patents, oh, we have our this, oh, we have our that. Well, at the end of the day, all technology is a tool to accomplish an objective, and
That's right.
everything is at risk of being commoditized. Whether you're an attorney, whether you know things that we thought of that were protected or had a moat around them. Now, some are at greater risk than others, and I am a huge believer that the most cost-effective way to fight commoditization is through thought leadership.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I said listening to your podcast would certainly help those CEOs out there. I
know. I just wanted you to say it again.
Yeah, no, I mean, give me that T-ball, man. I'm knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, there you go.
Truly, going back to the fact that businesses and products and services can be spun up so quickly in the SaaS world where compute power is there, storage is there. Building products and services is not easy, but it's a hell of a lot easier than it used to be. Now, the buyer is trying to figure out how to make their businesses more effective, more efficient. How do they do? How do they buy? We can teach people how to professionally sell, but we don't teach people how to professionally buy, right? People don't necessarily understand how to buy. And with all of these differing products that all seem to say the same thing, how do they stand out? How do they look different? How do I relate to whomever is selling me something, right? So if that product or that person speaks to me, they understand me. They understand my persona.
So go back to the CEO though. So go back to the CEO because I'm a CEO sitting here. I've got my pen out and I'm trying to figure this out, right? And I've talked to my other CEO friends, and one says, go write a book and make yourself a rock star. Another says, host a podcast. Another says, get senior leadership on your team out on podcasts. Another says, democratize it, have 22 people in the firm create thought leadership. What are the things, like, how did Ring DNA start down the path of thought leadership?
Yeah, I think I've spent the last 25 years in some way or another in thought leadership. I think the idea of thought leadership has evolved dramatically and rapidly. And so to me, thought leadership is critical in telling a story. Thought leadership is critical in delivering that value. But to answer your question more directly, I think it very much depends on the state of your current company. What currently exists is thought leadership that's in the sales department, in the marketing department, in the office of the CEO. It's all over the place, right?
And it might not even be officially recognized as a thing, but Charlie over there writes an article for this trade magazine and the CEO occasionally speaks at this, like it's this scattered about kind of thing that nobody really owns.
Right. So a couple of years ago, we bought the podcast and brought on Andy Paul. Andy Paul is a thought leader in the sales space. Why does that matter? Because he
and a client of Thought Leadership Leverage for a long time.
And a client. So but Andy has an audience of people who listen to him daily, weekly, who subscribe to his beliefs. and understand that when they come to that podcast, they're going to be presented value that directly correlates to them and their life. Whether it's Andy or myself or any other individuals within our organization, trying to create value and deliver that value to our customers, to our prospects, that ultimately will help differentiate us from any other commoditized service that exists out there in the marketplace.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
A lot of marketing.
So stay there for 1 second, Howard. So I think, because there's a lot of key points that I want to just push on a little bit. So Andy's awesome. Andy has produced, I don't even know how many thousands of podcast episodes by now, and has developed an amazing brand in the sales space, right? So I know when I tune into Andy, my headspace is I'm going to find some really good, insightful information relative to sales. I'm not going to hear about wine. I'm not going to hear about technology. I'm not going to hear about, I don't know, the war for talent. He doesn't jump on some of the bandwagons. Laser focus. So I think part of the challenge folks have with thought leadership is, there's so many things I could say and should say and might say, whatever. You have to think of it like a radio station, right? If I have my classic rock station in my car, and then I have my jazz station, and I turn on the jazz station, and there's punk rock, and there's, I turn on the classic station, and it's like heavy metal or something. I'm really confused. And I think that because there's so much coming at us so quickly, that level of consistency is absolutely mission critical.
You nailed it. By nature, we're fairly tribal people, which means we want what we want. We want like-minded people. We want to feel comfortable. We want to get what we expect. And I think marketing and sales has thought about broadcasting, right? Let's send messages out. Let's a widest trap possible. It's really about narrowcasting, right? It's really about, you've seen this movement towards account-based marketing, account-based sales. It's really understanding who you're selling to, who you're talking to, and making sure that you deliver very specific value to that persona.
So I'm in violent agreement of what you said. And I think that part of the issue is it is somewhat lazy to be broadcasting, and it's harder to narrowcast, right?
100%.
And to us, when we work with our clients, like, we've got to get really tight on what are the avatars. You can't be all things to all people, full stop. So who are we trying to reach? And it doesn't mean that each organization has one avatar. You might have 3, you might have 5, whatever. But what are the pain points of a sales leader versus an individual contributor? What are the pain points of somebody selling, product versus services? A high ticket complex sale with a long sales cycle versus something short and whatever. Different pain points, right? And you can't deliver a one size fits all message in this world. So I love the narrowcasting piece. It's harder to do, but the ROI is exponentially greater if you crack the code on it.
100%. And let's go back to your question, which is, I'm a CEO sitting here listening to this podcast. Where do I start? Where do you start is, what is your superpower? What is so unique about you? What value can you present that you can bring that makes you a thought leader? Because if you don't have something unique and you're just broad, then probably you shouldn't be a thought leader. You should be a generalist, and you should find someone else within the organization that can be that thought leader.
And that's okay too. And that, some people don't have the passion for whatever. I would say I love the superpower idea, but I would layer on top of the superpower. Let's start with, most CEOs, I would say almost all, can clearly identify their strategy, their goals, their objectives, et cetera. What does that play? And sometimes thought leadership starts as this skunk works. I don't know. It's sort of a thing and whatever. It can't be the tail that wags the dog. If our business strategy is growth through client penetration versus growth through net new client acquisition, great. Then our thought leadership needs to support that. If not, it's just noise, right? So how do we look at our business objectives and goals, then say, what is the thought leadership that can support this? And it's not that the answer to every business objective is more thought leadership. That's just not so. Yeah. But thought leadership, it could be if you as a CEO were selling to other CEOs, the modality by which you deliver that thought leadership could be a series of very intimate dinners right? Could be one-on-one. You might be in 5 different cities with 10 different CEOs talking your talking points, literally not, verbatim, but that is a deployment of thought leadership that's different where, somebody brings in Howard at some industry conference in front of 1,000 individual contributor thought leaders. So different, same DNA, the thought leadership, no pun intended, right? But different audience, different tuning, different anecdotes to bring it to life, etc.
Yeah, I mean, hyper personalization is something we've been talking about. Like,
Yeah.
if your thought leadership is hyper personalized, then you're probably doing a pretty good job. You've identified your audience and you're delivering expected value every time they log into your podcast, every time they read your white paper, when they open your book. You have hyper personalized your experience, your expertise, and you have found that audience.
So I want to just expand on that because I think that's a critical piece. So I think about a continuum of feedback that you can get on a piece of thought leadership. On one end of the continuum, wow, Howard, it sounds like you wrote that article just for me. You were the fly on the wall in the meeting I had a week ago Tuesday, and that piece that you did was holy cow. Like you're in my head. Holy cow, man. The other side of it is back in the day when we were flying, I'm sitting in the airline and I'd got the airline magazine. And it's like 7 restaurants to eat in Austin, Texas. Not that that's bad content, but that was written for anybody that happened to sit in seat 13B that day, right?
Exactly.
And it doesn't have that sense of, we all want to feel special. We all want, bespoke, right? And I think getting that challenge so that everybody feels as if, because you don't want to literally go through the effort of writing custom content for 800 different clients, but how do you get it so that the feeling is as bespoke as possible for everyone that experiences it? And I think that's really where the challenge is.
Yeah, and that's where the excitement is. And for me, I think of myself as a revenue scientist, right? We're trying to understand what works for what persona in every possible situation, right? So the idea of situational awareness, that's what makes an all-star baseball player is they understand the situational awareness. They understand what that situation is and what they need to get done. And so whether they're at bat or they're the star second baseman that knows that they have to throw the ball to second base before first, that split second, that moment is what creates those experts. It's why they succeed and they win. And what we're trying to do is study that. We're trying to understand all the different situations so that you can optimize for that performance, right? Everybody talks about ABM or account-based marketing or hyper-personalization. You have to understand a lot about people. You have to understand what makes them tick, what they value, what emotionally connects with them, what has worked and what hasn't. You brought up food and the restaurant guide in the back of the magazine. I met with a Michelin chef one time. He said, do you know what the greatest feedback, the greatest thing that I can get? Strictly black and white. Did the person finish everything on the plate? It's binary, right? Here's a Michelin chef saying, I can tell if they liked it based on whether or not they ate it.
Right. How much of the scraps are going in the garbage? Probably not a good sign. Right.
If we can make other decisions that simple, right? Like figuring out what works and what doesn't and prescribing that, that's what's exciting for me. So figuring out what works for people, whether it's thought leadership or sales or anything else, you need to communicate to your audience.
Yeah, I love it. So this has been phenomenal, Howard. I appreciate you sharing your insights and your opinions. And it seems like we're in violent agreement on lots of things, which might be somewhat less interesting to listeners, but I think there's a lot to be learned from your journey as well. So thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.